It was a cold, rainy day on campus when I first noticed how blue his eyes really were. The kind of day where the sky hangs low and heavy, and everyone hurries between buildings with their shoulders hunched and heads down. I'm Emily, by the way. Emily Chun, 21, junior at Westlake University, and hopelessly confused about my best friend. That's where this story begins. Not with some grand romantic gesture or love at first sight, but with rain soaking through my favorite hoodie and the sudden realization that Jake Matthews had somehow become the most important person in my world without me even noticing. Jake and I had been friends since freshman orientation. He was the tall, easygoing guy with perpetually messy brown hair who somehow managed to charm everyone he met without even trying. We bonded over a shared love of obscure indie bands and a mutual hatred of the dining hall's mystery meat Mondays. 2 years later, we were inseparable, study partners, movie marathon buddies, and each other's emergency contact. Nothing romantic about it. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. That rainy Tuesday changed everything. I was rushing across the quad, already late for Professor Harmon's literature seminar, when the skies truly opened up. Not just rain, but the kind of downpour that feels personal, like the weather itself has a vendetta against you specifically. My thin hoodie, navy blue with white drawstrings, a thrift store find I'd worn until it was perfectly soft, was soaked through in seconds. And there was Jake, appearing like some kind of guardian angel under the awning of the Humanities building, his own jacket held over his head. He called out, laughing at my bedraggled state. You look like a drowned rat. Only Jake could insult me and make it sound endearing. I stuck my tongue out at him as I ducked under the awning, pushing wet hair from my face. Not all of us check 3 different weather apps before leaving our apartments. I shot back, though I couldn't help but smile. Jake was nothing if not prepared for everything. He carried an umbrella when the forecast showed a 10% chance of showers. He kept granola bars in his backpack in case anyone got hungry during study sessions. He remembered how everyone took their coffee without having to ask. Here, he said, shrugging off his flannel overshirt and draping it around my shoulders. Can't have my favorite person catching pneumonia. The casual way he said it, my favorite person, made something flutter in my chest. His hands lingered on my shoulders just a second longer than necessary, and I found myself noticing the warmth of them through the damp fabric of my hoodie. We're going to be late, I said, breaking the strange tension that had suddenly sprung up between us. But as we hurried into the building, something had shifted. I was acutely aware of him beside me, the slight brush of his arm against mine, the scent of his cologne on the flannel I now wore, the way he instinctively slowed his longer stride to match mine. Let me explain why this matters. Friendship is comfortable. It's safe. Romantic feelings are messy and complicated and risk ruining something precious. I'd watched enough friend groups implode after failed relationship attempts to know better. So I'd been ignoring the way my heart raced when Jake texted, or how I found excuses to touch him, straightening his collar, brushing lint from his shoulder, playfully shoving him during our debates about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. It absolutely does not, for the record. Our daily interactions had always been filled with the kind of easy banter that comes from knowing someone well. We shared 3 classes that semester: advanced literary theory, film studies, and a psychology elective we'd both taken on a whim. Group projects meant late nights in the library, shoulders touching as we huddled over laptops, arguing good-naturedly about thesis statements and citation formats. Your problem, Jake would say, leaning close enough that I could count his eyelashes, is that you overthink everything. Sometimes you need to just go with your gut. And your problem, I'd counter, trying to ignore how his proximity made it hard to focus, is that you're too impulsive. Some things need careful consideration. We weren't flirting. At least, I didn't think we were. But there was something in the way his eyes would linger on mine, something in the way he'd find reasons to be near me, that made me wonder. And wondering was dangerous. During the weeks that followed that rainy day, I found myself caught in an internal tug-of-war. Every time Jake texted to ask if I wanted to grab coffee, every time he saved me a seat in class, every time he remembered some small detail about my likes and dislikes, I felt the same confusing mix of happiness and panic. What if these feelings ruined everything? What if I was reading too much into ordinary friendship? What if I wasn't? My roommate, Zoe, had no patience for my indecision. You're both obviously into each other, she'd say, rolling her eyes as I analyzed Jake's latest text message for hidden meaning. Just kiss him already and put us all out of our misery. But it wasn't that simple. Jake was the person I called when I aced an exam or when I got into an argument with my parents. He was the one who brought me soup when I had the flu and who knew exactly which movies would cheer me up after a bad day. Risking all of that for a relationship that might not work out seemed foolish. And yet, there were moments, brief, electric moments, when I was certain there was something more between us. Like the time we were studying in his apartment, and I fell asleep on his couch. I woke up with a blanket tucked around me and found him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Or the night we walked back from a party, and he took my hand to help me over a puddle, but didn't let go for the next 3 blocks. The real turning point came unexpectedly, as these things often do. It was a Friday evening, and we were in the university library's quiet study area, tucked away in our favorite corner by the tall windows overlooking the campus pond. Rain pattered against the glass. It had been an unusually wet autumn, and the library was nearly empty as most students had already left for the weekend. Jake was helping me prepare for my upcoming presentation on modernist literature, but I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about how the soft library lighting made his features look softer, how his fingers moved as he flipped through my note cards, how comfortable this silence between us felt. "What's going on with you tonight?" he finally asked, setting down my notes. "You've been a million miles away." I hesitated, then decided to be partially honest. "I've just been thinking a lot lately. About the future, about what I want." "And what do you want, Em?" His voice was quiet, serious in a way that made my heart beat faster. "I'm scared of change," I admitted. "Of making wrong choices. Of losing the good things I already have." I wasn't just talking about career paths or graduation plans, and I think we both knew it. Jake shifted closer, our knees touching under the table. "Sometimes the things we're most afraid to do are exactly what we need to do." He looked down at his hands, then back up at me. "I've been thinking a lot, too. About us." The word hung in the air between us. Us. Such a small word to carry so much meaning. "What about us?" I barely recognized my own voice, how small it sounded. "I think you know," he said softly. "I think we've both been dancing around this for a long time." I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything I'd been feeling, everything I'd been trying to ignore, was suddenly right there in the open. "Jake, I started, but the words wouldn't come. How do you tell your best friend that you're terrified of loving them because you might lose them? How do you explain that the thought of them is what gets you through bad days, that their laugh is your favorite sound, that sometimes you look at them and can't remember what life was like before they were in it?" "You don't have to say anything," he said, misinterpreting my silence. "I shouldn't have brought it up. Let's just forget." "No," I interrupted, finding my voice at last. "No, I don't want to forget it. I'm just scared. You're too important to me. What if we mess this up?" His expression softened. "What if we don't?" The simplicity of the question caught me off guard. What if we didn't mess it up? What if this was the beginning of something wonderful rather than the end of something precious? We talked for hours that night, long after the library closed, sitting on the steps outside as the rain finally stopped and stars appeared in patches between the clouds. We talked about our fears and hopes, about the moment each of us realized our feelings had changed, about all the times we'd almost said something but held back. It was the most honest conversation we'd ever had, and with each word, the fear inside me began to recede, replaced by something warm and hopeful. As we walked back toward my apartment, a comfortable silence fell between us. The campus was quiet, most windows dark, the paths illuminated by evenly spaced lampposts that created pools of golden light. I had my hands tucked into the pocket of my hoodie, the same navy blue one, now dry but still bearing the slight wrinkles from that downpour weeks ago. We stopped at the intersection where our paths would normally diverge. Jake to his apartment 3 blocks east, me to the building I shared with Zoe just ahead. "So," he said, rocking slightly on his heels. "So," I echoed, suddenly shy despite everything we'd just shared. He stepped closer, and I could see the slight nervousness in his eyes, the way he bit his lower lip, a habit he had when he was thinking hard about something. "Emily," he said, my full name sounding different in his voice, more significant somehow. "Can I?" But he didn't finish the question. Instead, he reached forward and gently took hold of the white drawstrings of my hoodie, one in each hand. For a moment, he just looked at me, as if memorizing my face. Then slowly, deliberately, He pulled on the strings, drawing me toward him until we were nose to nose. I could feel his breath, warm against my lips. Could see the flecks of darker blue in his irises. Could sense the slight tremble in his hands. Time seemed to slow down, stretching this moment into eternity. And then he kissed me. Not a hesitant, questioning kiss, but one filled with certainty and longing. His lips were warm against mine, slightly chapped from the cold air, moving with a tenderness that made my knees weak. One hand released my hoodie string to cup my cheek, his thumb brushing lightly across my skin. I felt myself melting into him, my hands finding their way to his shoulders, then his neck, then into his hair. It was everything a first kiss should be, both surprising and inevitable, like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, I kept my eyes closed for an extra moment, wanting to memorize the feeling. Wow, I whispered when I finally looked at him again. He smiled, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I've been wanting to do that for so long. Why didn't you? I asked, my hands still resting on his shoulders, unwilling to break contact. Same reason you didn't, I guess. Too much to lose. His fingers played with my hoodie strings again, wrapping them around his index finger. But tonight, I realized there's even more to lose by not taking the chance. The aftermath of that kiss was both exactly what I'd feared and nothing like I'd expected. There was awkwardness, yes, moments when we'd reach for each other and then hesitate, old habits of friendship colliding with new possibilities. There were moments of almost painful self-consciousness, like when he took my hand in the campus coffee shop and I knocked over my latte, because I was so distracted by the feeling of his fingers interlaced with mine. But there was also a wonderful sense of discovery, of seeing someone familiar through new eyes. I noticed things about Jake I'd never allowed myself to fully acknowledge before. The way the corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher on the right when he smiled, how expressive his hands were when he talked about things he was passionate about, the particular way he said my name when it was just the two of us. So are you too? Like official now? Zoe asked the next morning, finding me sitting on our tiny balcony, hugging my knees to my chest, and smiling at nothing in particular. I don't know, I admitted. We didn't really talk about labels. But there was kissing, she prompted, settling into the chair beside me with a knowing grin. There was definitely kissing. I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face at the memory. About time, she said, bumping her shoulder against mine. The tension between you two was getting ridiculous. The question of what exactly we were to each other now came up later that day when Jake texted asking if I wanted to get dinner. Is this a date? I texted back, heart pounding as I waited for his response. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I'd like it to be. If you would. We met at a small Italian restaurant just off campus, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wax-covered wine bottles. Jake was already there when I arrived, standing up quickly when he saw me, nearly knocking over his water glass in the process. Hi, he said, suddenly looking as nervous as I felt. Hi, I replied, equally eloquent. We stood there for a moment, caught in the strange new territory between friendship and something more. Then he laughed, breaking the tension. This is weird, isn't it? He said, pulling out my chair. I've eaten dinner with you hundreds of times, but now I'm overthinking everything. Me too, I admitted as I sat down. I changed my outfit 4 times. Well, the final choice was worth the effort, he said, his eyes warm as they took in my simple dress and cardigan. You look beautiful. The compliment made me blush. It wasn't that Jake had never said nice things to me before, but there was a different weight to his words now, a new meaning. Over pasta and garlic bread, we navigated this new dynamic, sometimes slipping comfortably into our usual banter, other times falling into shy silences filled with meaningful glances. By dessert, tiramisu, shared between us, we'd found a rhythm, a blend of the friendship we'd always had and the relationship we were building. So, Jake said as we walked back toward campus, his hand warm around mine. I think we should talk about what this is. What we are. I nodded, appreciating his directness. What do you want us to be? He stopped walking, turning to face me under the glow of a streetlight. I want to be with you, Em. Not just as friends who sometimes kiss. I want to call you my girlfriend. I want to take you on real dates and hold your hand in public and all that stuff. But only if that's what you want to. The sincerity in his voice made my throat tight with emotion. "I want that too," I said softly. "All of it." His smile was radiant as he leaned down to kiss me, right there on the sidewalk, not caring who might see. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing after that. As our relationship evolved, we faced challenges we hadn't anticipated. Some of our friends were thrilled, "Finally," was the most common response, but others were concerned. "What happens when you break up?" my friend Lily asked bluntly over coffee. "The whole friend group will have to choose sides." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," I said, trying to keep my tone light despite the way her words echoed my own fears. "I'm just being realistic," she shrugged. "College relationships rarely last." Jake faced similar questions from his roommate, Marcus. "Dude, she was your best friend. Isn't it weird now?" These external pressures were compounded by our own insecurities. There were moments of jealousy I'd never experienced during our friendship, like when I saw Jake laughing with his lab partner, a pretty geology major named Amber, or when he mentioned hanging out with his ex from freshman year to return some books she'd left in his apartment. And there were misunderstandings. Our first real fight happened 3 weeks after that initial kiss, when Jake canceled our plans last minute to help a friend move. "You could have given me more notice," I said, hurt that he'd texted rather than called. "I turned down going to Zoe's cousin's gallery opening for this." "I didn't think it was that big a deal," he replied, sounding frustrated. "We hang out all the time. But this was different. This was a date. Every time we hang out is special to me," he countered. "That hasn't changed just because we're dating now." We were both right, in our ways. I needed to recognize that our strong foundation of friendship was an asset, not something to move beyond. And he needed to understand that I wanted some distinction, some acknowledgement that our romantic relationship was different from our friendship. We worked through it, talking late into the night, learning how to navigate this new territory together. And in many ways, the very friendship that I'd been so afraid of losing became the strength of our relationship. We already knew how to communicate, how to compromise, how to make each other laugh after a disagreement. As weeks turned into months, we settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and thrillingly new. We still studied together in the library and argued about pizza toppings, but now those study sessions sometimes ended with kissing instead of just coffee, and our arguments were often resolved with playful negotiations that involved more physical contact than before. The navy blue hoodie became a symbol of sorts between us. Jake loved to tug on the strings when he wanted my attention, a callback to that first perfect kiss. Sometimes he'd do it playfully, in the middle of a crowded room, just enough to make me look up at him. Other times, like when we were alone in his apartment watching movies, he'd pull me close for a kiss that still made my heart race even after dozens, hundreds of similar moments. 6 months after that rainy night, we were sitting on the banks of the campus pond, watching ducks glide across the water as the spring semester came to a close. Jake had his arm around me, my head resting on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing my pensive mood. "How scared I was to risk our friendship," I admitted. "How I almost missed out on all of this because I was afraid of change." He kissed the top of my head. "I was scared too. But some things are worth being brave for." I looked up at him, this person who had been my best friend and was now so much more. "Do you ever miss how things were before? Just being friends?" "No," he said without hesitation. "Because we still have that friendship. We just added to it." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way I loved. "Besides, I get to do this now." And he reached for my hoodie strings. I was still wearing the same navy blue one, now even more worn and soft, and pulled me toward him for a kiss that felt like coming home. As I think back on our journey from friendship to romance, I'm struck by how the things we fear most are often the very things that bring us the greatest joy. I was so afraid of losing Jake that I almost never got to experience loving him. I was so worried about ruining what we had that I almost missed discovering how much more we could be together. The hoodie strings that Jake tugged that night became more than just a cute gesture. They became a symbol of the connection between us, the thread that had always been there, just waiting for us to acknowledge it. Sometimes the most meaningful relationships grow from the most ordinary beginnings. A shared class, a rainy day, a favorite hoodie, and the courage to take a chance on something wonderful. Now, as we plan for graduation and whatever comes next, I'm no longer afraid of change. Because I know that whatever the future holds, we'll face it together, as best friends who fell in love, who took a risk, and found that what they gained was worth infinitely more than what they feared losing. And sometimes, on rainy days that remind me of where it all began, Jake still grabs my hoodie strings, pulls me close until we're nose to nose, and kisses me like he means it. Because he does. And so do I. Total _char_count. 18,863.